Western diplomats keep asking the same question. Why is China so hostile, so paranoid, so convinced we're out to get them? They genuinely don't understand. Here's what they're missing. China doesn't see the West the way the West sees itself. You see democracies, trading partners, the good guys. China sees something else entirely. China sees the nations that destroyed them, humiliated them, carved them up like a Thanksgiving turkey, and called it opening markets. And here's the uncomfortable truth your foreign policy experts won't tell you. China isn't paranoid. China is remembering what Western powers actually did. Not ancient history, your grandparents' lifetime. Events documented in Western archives, admitted in Western parliaments, recorded by Western witnesses. You've watched China's suspicion grow your whole life. The Cold War hostility, the diplomatic tensions, the trade wars. And you've probably wondered, why can't they just move on? Because some wounds don't heal, especially when the people who inflicted them never acknowledged the knife. You're about to understand why. Let's start where the wound started. 1839. China was the richest empire on Earth. Had been for centuries. Then Britain showed up with a business problem. The British were obsessed with Chinese tea, couldn't get enough. But China didn't want anything Britain was selling. Silver was flowing out of British coffers into China. The trade deficit was unsustainable. So British merchants found something China would buy: opium, grown in British India, smuggled into Chinese ports. By 1838, British parliamentary records estimated somewhere between 4 and 12 million Chinese were addicted. Even the conservative number is staggering. That's the population of London at the time, several times over. Fathers who couldn't work, mothers who couldn't function, children watching their families dissolve into smoke. China's emperor tried to stop it, sent an official named Lin Zezhu to Canton to destroy the opium stockpiles. He wrote a letter to Queen Victoria. You can still read it in archives, appealing to her conscience, asking why Britain would sell poison they'd banned in their own country. The letter was never answered. Instead, Britain sent gunboats. The First Opium War. It lasted 3 years. China lost. Badly. The Treaty of Nanking, still sitting in British archives, forced China to pay $21 million in silver, open 5 ports to British trade, and hand over a rocky island called Hong Kong for 156 years. But here's what made this wound so deep. It wasn't just a military defeat. It was moral shock. China had seen itself as the center of civilization. The Middle Kingdom. Now they'd been beaten by what they considered barbarians. Beaten badly. Forced to legalize the drug trade that was destroying their people. And it wasn't over. 20 years later, Britain wanted more. The Second Opium War. This time, British and French troops marched all the way to Beijing. In October 1860, Lord Elgin, the British commander, ordered his soldiers to burn the Summer Palace. 3 days, 3,500 troops, 200 buildings, 800 acres of the most beautiful architecture in Asia, gone. Priceless artifacts looted. Many still sit in British museums today. Lord Elgin wrote in his own letters that he burned it specifically to humiliate the emperor, to send a message: we can reach you anywhere, we can destroy anything you love. The Chinese call what followed the century of humiliation. That phrase gets taught to every Chinese student today. The wound was cut in 1839. It hasn't stopped bleeding. After the Opium Wars, Other powers smelled blood. France took territory, Russia took territory, Germany demanded a port. Japan, after defeating China in 1895, took Taiwan and influence over Korea. By 1900, China looked like a pizza being divided. Western historians called them spheres of influence. The Chinese had another word: humiliation. In Shanghai, foreign powers carved out concessions, zones where Chinese law didn't apply, where Chinese people became second-class citizens in their own city. Here's a detail that still burns. Parks in these foreign concessions reportedly had signs that read, "No dogs" or "Chinese." Historians debate the exact wording, but the sentiment was documented. British, French, American citizens walking through Chinese cities with more rights than Chinese people had. Imagine that for a second. Your own neighborhood. Signs telling you where you can't go. In your own country. Then came 1900, the Boxer Rebellion. Chinese nationalists attacked foreign legations in Beijing, trying to expel the outsiders. The response? 8 nations invaded: Britain, France, United States, Germany, Russia, Japan, Italy, Austria-Hungary. 50,000 foreign troops marching through Beijing. The Boxer Protocol of 1901 demanded 450 million taels in silver, about $333 million at the time, roughly $61 billion in today's money. That was over 1,300% of China's annual tax revenue. And here's the knife twist. The money wasn't just reparations. It was punishment, designed to keep China weak, payable over 39 years with interest. Every year, a reminder of defeat. American troops were there. Your great-grandfathers might have marched through Beijing. This isn't ancient history. It's family history. If the Opium Wars cut the wound, Japan tore it wide open. 1937, Japan invaded China. Full-scale war. But one event burned into Chinese memory more than any other. Nanjing. 6 weeks. December 1937 to January 1938. The death toll is disputed. Chinese historians say 300,000. Japanese conservatives say far fewer. But Western witnesses were there. John Rabe, a German businessman, actually a Nazi party member, stayed behind to protect Chinese civilians and documented what he saw. His diaries are preserved. American missionaries wrote letters home describing mass executions, systematic rape, streets filled with bodies. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East later documented over 200,000 civilians and prisoners killed. Even conservative Western estimates put it at tens of thousands. And here's what deepened this wound. Where was the West? America was officially neutral until Pearl Harbor in 1941. Britain was focused on Europe. China fought Japan largely alone for 4 years. 4 years of bombing, occupation, atrocities. When China begged for help, the help came slowly, came with conditions, came after millions had already died. The wound here isn't just Japanese brutality, it's Western abandonment. The feeling that when China was bleeding, the world looked away. This wound might be the most bitter, because China expected gratitude, got containment instead. China fought on the Allied side in World War II, lost an estimated 15 to 20 million people, more than any country except the Soviet Union. Tied down over 1 million Japanese troops that couldn't fight elsewhere. When the war ended, China expected a seat at the table, expected recognition, expected the spheres of influence era to finally end. Instead, civil war resumed. The Communists won in 1949, and the United States, your government, refused to recognize the new People's Republic. For 22 years. Think about that. The most populous nation on Earth, and America pretended its government didn't exist, kept recognizing the defeated nationalists in Taiwan as the real China, blocked the PRC from the United Nations until 1971. Then came Korea. Chinese troops fought American troops directly. 36,000 Americans died. Chinese casualties were far higher. Estimates range from 180,000 to over 400,000. Fathers fighting fathers. A generation of enmity sealed. If you grew up during the Cold War, you remember the propaganda. Red China, communist menace, the enemy. But flip the perspective. From Beijing's view, they'd helped defeat Japan, lost millions of people, and the reward was isolation, containment, being treated as a pariah by the nations that had forced opium on them, burned their palaces, and divided their territory. The feeling of betrayal calcified into policy. Trust the West? The West had proven repeatedly it couldn't be trusted. You might think these wounds are old, healing, moving past. They're not, because the cuts kept coming. May 7th, 1999, NATO bombs hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the Kosovo War. 3 Chinese journalists killed. The US called it an accident, a targeting error using outdated maps. China didn't believe it. Still doesn't. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese protesters filled the streets. The American ambassador's residence was attacked. The fury wasn't just about 3 deaths. It was the accumulated rage of 160 years suddenly given a fresh target. Accident or not, and US officials insist it was, the damage was done. Here was proof too, Chinese eyes, that America was still willing to kill Chinese people, still careless with Chinese lives. Then came the 2001 Hainan Island incident. American spy plane collided with Chinese fighter jet. Chinese pilot killed. American crew held for 11 days. Then came the pivot to Asia, American military assets shifting to surround China. Then came the trade war, tariffs, sanctions, Huawei bans, TikTok threats, decoupling. From Washington, these look like policy responses to a rising competitor. From Beijing, they look like the continuation of a 180-year pattern. Western powers trying to keep China down, humiliate China, control China. You see trade policy. They see the opium wars with different weapons. Here's what Western policymakers consistently miss. These wounds aren't just remembered, they're actively maintained. Walk into any Chinese school. The century of humiliation is in the curriculum. Students learn the opium wars in detail. They visit museums built specifically to document foreign atrocities. The Nanjing Massacre Memorial, the old Summer Palace ruins. This isn't propaganda invented by the current government. It's history, documented history. The same events recorded in Western archives, reported by Western journalists, admitted in Western parliaments. But here's the difference. In the West, this history is a footnote. Most Americans couldn't tell you what the opium wars were. Most British people don't know their country burned China's most beautiful palace. It's not taught, not emphasized, not remembered. In China, it's identity. Every Chinese leader since Mao has invoked the century of humiliation. It's how they justify one-party rule. We keep China strong so it never happens again. It's how they explain military buildup. We will never be defenseless again. It's how they frame economic policy. We will never be dependent again. The wounds serve a purpose. They unify, they motivate, they justify. But here's the harder truth. They also can't heal because the West has never acknowledged them. No British Prime Minister has apologized for the Opium Wars. No American president has apologized for the decades of non-recognition. The Summer Palace artifacts still sit in Western museums. The history is documented, but not owned. When Germany apologized for the Holocaust, it helped heal wounds with Israel. When Japan apologized, however inadequately in Chinese eyes, for World War II, it at least acknowledged the crime. For the century of humiliation, silence. Not denial, just nothing. How do you heal a wound the other side won't admit they inflicted? You've watched this tension build your entire life. When you did duck and cover drills, China was the nuclear threat your teachers warned about. When Nixon flew to Beijing, you were told America was bringing China into the modern world. But Beijing saw it differently. They saw America finally admitting it couldn't ignore them anymore. When Tiananmen happened, you expected the regime to fall. It didn't, because the Communist Party had something Western analysts underestimated: a promise to never let China be humiliated again. When China joined the WTO, you heard predictions of democratization. Instead, China got rich on global trade and stayed exactly what it was, because getting rich wasn't the goal. Respect was. Power was. Never being weak again was. This isn't about excusing Chinese government actions. The surveillance state, the human rights issues, the territorial aggression, those deserve criticism. But criticism without understanding is just noise. Western governments keep wondering why China acts with such suspicion, such defensiveness, such burning determination to be strong at any cost. The answer is written in wounds that never healed, wounds Western powers inflicted, wounds documented in Western archives, wounds that have never been meaningfully acknowledged, let alone addressed. Imagine your country was drugged, defeated, carved up, occupied, abandoned, and isolated, all in living memory, all by nations now lecturing you about human rights. Would you trust them? Understanding this doesn't mean agreeing with every Chinese policy. It means understanding why those policies exist. Why never again isn't a slogan in China, it's a governing philosophy. The question isn't whether China will forgive. The question is whether the West will ever understand why forgiveness isn't coming. And whether, knowing this history, we can build something other than the same cycle of suspicion and conflict that's defined the last 180 years. That's the question your grandchildren will inherit, whether they know this history or not.